Everyone's attention.
So everyone, can we
Get this
get your
party started.
attention? We're getting ready to start. So if everybody can gather around, and Steve is Gateway is going to explain to us exactly how this beautiful world was created.
Please do.
So I'd like to
Hey,
present to you Steve Tietze, Gateway, who has done many scans across the Black Rock Desert, and including the Fly Ranch and the Fly Geysers. And we have this wonderful presentation for you today. So,
yeah,
Steve, the
yeah.
stage
Thank
is
you.
yours.
All right,
And
thank
make
you.
sure you're amplified.
Am I? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Sweet. Everybody can hear me. All right. Thanks everybody for coming. We're gonna kind of go over the basic flow of how this was created, and hopefully you guys will learn something. Um, this is all done by photogrammetry. So let's go ahead and get to the first slide, please. Next slide. Okay. So this is kind of my process, and as we all know, and you guys can get closer. I'll probably be facing that way. As you all know, things can be done in many, many ways. So the process that all starts in a terminology called photogrammetry. And basically what that means is you shoot your images of a subject. Then we process this through a specific software, and then we'll export this to a high polygon model. And I'll go through each one of these steps, but this is just like the basics. And then after you've done that, there's a whole optimization and cleanup process where you kind of reduce the polygons. And a polygon is just a triangle, if you're not aware, that makes up a 3D object, or a bunch of triangles that make up 3D objects. We'll also go over fixing polygon errors, rebuilding the UV map, and rebaking. Now, if all of this sounds scary, it's not. I'll do it in more of a layman's terms, and we won't go into a complete depth of it. But if we can go to the next slide, we can go ahead and get started. So photogrammetry, this term is basically the art and science of extracting 3D information from photographs. The process involves taking overlapping photographs of an object, structure, or space, and then you basically turn them into a 2D or 3D model. This is the definition that Autodesk uses. There is a much more, if you use Wikipedia, if you want to find in more detail in the guts and how it all happens, it's probably a good way to check that out. So let's go to the next slide, please. So on the image on the right, basically shows each blue square is an image taken by a drone. So it basically, what I've done is I flew my drone and ran specific software to create a sphere of photos around it. So coming to the first steps that you do in photogrammetry is just to take images of your subject, and you basically want to take enough images, and each image needs to overlap the other image a little bit so the software can do its job. If you're using a camera, a DSLR or something, you want to use a high aperture. High aperture will have crisper images and less depth of field. So what we don't want is any like really blurry backgrounds or depth of field in it. Avoid your blurry images that you take, delete them. And then we'll talk about the photogrammetry software that's available. So there are kind of three. One of them's free. Metashape is what I use. It runs on your Mac and PC, but it requires a graphics card, like an NVIDIA or AMD card. The reason I kind of use this is my workstation is a Mac, and I have a special Windows machine for doing a lot of other stuff, so I can kind of jump back and forth. Reality capture is PC only. It runs on the NVIDIA card, and that was purchased recently by Epic Games Studio. And if you know anything about Epic Games, they're the creators behind the Unreal Engine technology. So It's a really good software to use. Meshroom runs on your PC or Linux box. It's free. So that's a good way to get started. But most of these all have free trials, and with reality capture, you can play around with it all the way up to the end before you export your mesh. And even when you export your mesh, it might be a couple dollars. So it's not that, doesn't cost that much. In the past, these packages were thousands and thousands of dollars. So the process of photogrammetry is basically we align the images that you take, and this is done in the software. And then once the images are aligned, it builds something called like a point cloud. And in this case, it starts with a sparse point cloud. What a point cloud is it's 3D dots in space. So just think of pixels in space. And we build a dense point cloud, and I'll have slides that'll show you exactly what these mean after this. And then from the dense point cloud, convert everything into a 3D model. And then the last step usually is creating the texture after that. And this is all done, or the second to last step is, and then you export your model. This is pretty straightforward in Metashape. It's got a 1, 2, 3, 4 box. So for the most part, you can get up and running and export your model pretty quickly. Next slide, please. So we talked about the sparse point cloud. Now, if you look at this photo or screenshot, it's roughly about 41,000 dots, points in 3D space. So this is kind of the first phase that you'll start to see whatever subject you capture kind of come to life. Next slide. So this is the dense point cloud. Now it almost looks like a full 3D model, but if you zoom in close enough, you'll see there's still points in space. So this is about 20 million. So we went from 41,000, give or take, to 21 million points. Now, once you have this, everything can be created. You can turn it into a 3D model. Next slide. So from the dense point cloud, you get a 3D mesh out of this. And as you can see, this is kind of shows you the outline of the geyser that we have behind us. And the mesh that was created out of this process has 5.4 million polygons or faces. You'll hear me say faces or polygons a lot, and they mean the same thing. It's basically a triangle for the 3D model. I'm just kind of more of an old school person that has been using the word polygons for such a long time. Faces means the same thing. Next slide. So once you have all that done, the last step in the process is to create the texture. And that just runs through a process and takes all the images that you had and projects it onto this 3D model. Some of you may think, oh wow, that looks like an actual photograph. I mean, it gets pretty close to it, which is what we're trying to always achieve. And if anybody knows anything about texture maps, which is the actual image that's overlaid, kind of like if you overlaid a tablecloth on something and it molded over it, that would be the texture. This is a very high resolution texture, but with VR, we have to kind of like reduce that down. So the challenges that anybody faces in photogrammetry is taking this high polygon mesh and then and texture and reducing it down to something that is viewable in VR. And we'll talk about the reasons why that is in a bit. Next slide. So if you remember the previous slide where it was purple as well, you can see that there's less triangles all around the object. And that's a process called Polygon Reduction. So that's kind of what we're aiming for. So basically what you're standing on right now and what's behind you is made up of all these little triangles in the mesh with the texture applied to it. And I was able to take the original mesh, which is 5.4 million polygons, all the way down to 42,000 faces or polygons. So that was from 5 to 42,000, from 5 million to 42,000. That's a huge challenge to try to do that and keep the the look and feel and make sure it doesn't turn into just a blob. So next slide, please. So once the challenges in photogrammetry are kind of twofold. So the first part is where you take your images, you run it through the software, and then you output like a high polygon mesh. So that's step one. Step two is taking this 5.4 million polygons or triangles, trying to squeeze it down as low as possible. So there are many ways to do this. And I pick various softwares for different tasks. And in this case, I use something called Meshlab. And Meshlab is free. It runs on the Mac and PC. And it does a pretty good job at reducing the amount of polygons in your model down to a feasible amount that can be in VR or another game engine or something else. And then you can see in the screenshot, you know, this is just the little interface. Another thing that I do is with the geyser and the plat and everything that you're standing on, the terrain isn't that important. You know, it can kind of get a little warbly or have less detail in it, but the geyser I want more detail in. So when I do reduce the mesh, I select the terrain and reduce that down as far as I feel comfortable, keeping the geyser's polygon count higher. So when you look at it, it's much more detailed. There are other software pieces you can run this through. So Mesh Mixers by Autodesk, it is also free. Instant Meshes, another free program, and ZBrush. And these are all programs that will help you achieve taking high polygon mesh and reducing it down and reducing the number of polygons. And in this case, you can see the filter I used listed down here for Meshlab. Next slide, please. So now we've taken our little model or big model and we've reduced it down to a very small amount of polygons. But what happens is you get all these little errors in your triangles. So in the screenshot, you can kind of see the gray or the darkish gray. That means two triangles or three triangles are overlapping each other, and that's not what we want, because when you look at it in VR or somewhere else, it gets this like black triangle shade and it just looks bad. So we spend a lot of time cleaning this up. Now, mesh errors that can include the empty faces, points and edges, overlapping faces, which again are triangles or quads or whatever, edges, and you know, all kinds of other things. And in the screenshot, you can also see a list that says non-manifold and all that. Now in Blender, they have a cool little plugin that comes with Blender. It's called 3D Print. And the reason this is 3D Print is because when you send it to a printer, you can't have any of these errors. And your model needs to be airtight. So I use this to identify issues in my mesh. So when I click on one of those, everywhere in the mesh will highlight, and then I'll go ahead and try those. And depending on how complex things are, this can take you anywhere from a day to a week. And I'm always trying to optimize that process, but you know, there is no magic bullet in this process. This is where you spend the majority of your time if you're doing this process. So if you do ever have a paid gig and you want to do this, please remember that the photogrammetry, or the first part, is simple compared to cleaning up and fixing all these errors. And the reason to fix these errors is just to remove artifacts, shading errors, and then a process. It helps with a process called putting UVs on your actual object, and we'll discuss that next. Next slide, please. So a UV map is basically what you see, the texture kind of overlaid onto the mesh. So normally the mesh that we saw was all this purple with these triangles, but the UV map is actually what overlays the skin on top of the mesh. So on the left here is what's generated out of Metashape, what I had. No, it uses the whole square quite a bit, but there are all these little tiny little boxes and parts of Fly Geyser that if I wanted to go in Photoshop and fix those or make some changes, by painting over it and cloning it, it becomes a little more difficult. So by doing your cleanup process in the slide before, and then doing some UV mapping, you can get more on a flatter image or more easier to adjust, which is the image on the right. So it looks like more like a downward kind of image. You'll also notice on the bottom left, this little kind of like grayish J with a box. That's the platform that I'm standing on. And so I specifically unwrapped that to make it flat so that I could fix any of the shadows and other issues on this platform. So, it's good to take the time to kind of clean up and then do some UV mapping. Everybody has their own way to do it. And there are many ways to skin cats in this kind of, I shouldn't say that anymore, but there's many ways to do things. And this is just one of the processes. And I think it's important that you learn or go through these. Each one of these could take hours to explain, but this is, again, just a basic kind of overview. Next slide, please. So once you've done all that, you've reduced your model down, you've cleaned up all the little errors, you've created a nice little UV map to overlay on your mesh. You use a process called baking. And the term baking means taking your original 5.4 million polygon model with the texture and then having it bake all the data onto your low polygon model. So what you'll get is a very high quality map, but on a much smaller polygon base, which then allows you to basically view that into VR. So if you look at the images, on the right hand or left hand side, as you can see, like my number of polygons per model, and then eventually it went down to the 41,000 faces. And out of this, you can also bake what's called a normal map, which is a little bit more kind of advanced for this. But if you're into 3D, you kind of know what a normal map is, but it has detail, fine detail from the high polygon model that you can use in a custom shader that will make the shader in your VR world look a lot better and more details. So, and then there's all kinds of other maps. You can use all kinds of different software to bake stuff with. My first try is always bring it back into the photogrammetry software that I have because it has the ability to bake data. Blender has the ability to bake data, and it's pretty easy, but I find that I always get a lot more errors and I'm messing around with it way too much than I should be. There's an old program called XNormal, which runs on Windows. It's free. And then Substance Painter, which is owned by, I guess, Adobe. Not free, but has the ability to bake. And there's numerous other software packages that allow you to kind of transfer the texture data from your highest polygon model onto the low one. So that's kind of that process. And that kind of wraps up the kind of process into getting it in. So let's go to the next slide, please. So things to consider with VR is if you're building worlds or if you've built worlds, you probably know, or you know this already, but I'm constantly trying to take what I scan with photogrammetry and reducing the mesh, the model, the 3D model, as low as possible without kind of losing kind of its look and feel or shape. Things will start to just turn into mush. The textures that I use are 16K. So it's a 16,000 by 16,000 image. And then I reduce that down to a 4K or an 8K or a 1K texture map. And it really depends on the model. So the land that you're standing on and this whole world or this whole piece, requires a little more texture data. So if you look down on the ground, you'll notice it's not as fine detail, but that's kind of due to some of the limitations that we're dealing with in VR. We will get there, and it's just only a matter of time when we can have more texture memory on the VR headsets. Smaller objects that you scan, you can get much more higher detail, so they'll look a lot finer. Another thing to consider in VR is anywhere you look around when you spin your head, you need to make sure that the number of polygons, faces, the triangle count isn't too high, because if you turn your head from one location and then look at a very complex building, if it's too many polygons for the headset to render, it'll basically slow the frame rate down in your headset, and then you'll get some really bad motion sickness. So any world builders should always use some tools to check how much they have, how many polygons, and what their frame rate is. Now, Altspace recommends anywhere above 70, 71 frames per second wherever you turn your head. So if you can capture that, you're pretty good. So any world you build in, constantly be looking around and making sure that your frame rate is about above that. You can run in 69, 68, but just don't dip too low, because you don't want to make people sick, and nobody wants to be that sick in VR. And this can be found in the settings in Altspace under I forget the exact menu setting. And it's important to understand this landscape is huge, so this texture is huge. So when you enter a world, you'll usually see downloading, and you'll see 30 megs or 40 megs or whatever. The more texture memory that you use, more people have to download into their headsets. And this usually isn't a problem with modern day Wi-Fi connections and headsets, but you also have to consider the amount of space that people have on their Quest headsets too. So just always be aware, if you build a world, try to keep the amount of data that they have to load to view your world a little minimized as best as possible. So it's a challenge. It's just juggling, and it's really constantly going back and forth between the quality, reducing your polygons, and then just kind of testing and making sure that things are running at a decent frame rate. Next slide, please. So my final thoughts are just, there are many ways to kind of do this process. The software packages that I have listed and that I use, there are other things out there, and a lot of people that already do this have their way of kind of going through this process, and I'm always interested to hear on what they do, because cleanup and optimization process, if I could turn a week of work into half a week of work, I would love to do that. That is the biggest time usage in this process. So just keep that in mind, especially if you have a paid gig. Learn about proper UVing. That nobody likes UVing. It's a pain, and there are specific people that are very good at it. But if you can get down the basics, you'll be good. Learn how to bake your high texture poly or your high mesh down to the low mesh, and then just find the right tools and workflow that works for you. So everybody probably has a camera phone or maybe a DSLR or something like that. You can go ahead and try this out yourself. So there's an app for Android and iOS called Polycam, which you could say put a bowl or something intricate on a table and use that app, and then take photos all around it, and then it'll process this image into a mesh for you, and then you can take that mesh and learn to clean it up and play around with it. So that's just something if you're interested in getting started without, just something you could do at home actually. Reality Capture also has an app as well. And just start with some small objects. Some people will go outside and they have a cool tree with tree bark around it. Take a bunch of photos around it using those applications. Build a little tree bark, put it into VR. Just learn those steps of the process, learning how to optimize things. And honestly, just have fun with it, learn something new if this is something that you're interested in. Next slide, please. So that kind of wraps up this this point. This was an old photo of me on the playa, and then I had some little filter on it. But there's some of my contact information if you guys want to take a screenshot of this. On the bottom right is my little link tree, which if you go to it, will take you. You can see the 3D models on your browser, which is kind of cool. So all 3 geysers that are in here, you can view on your phone or desktop. And then there's a full 360 virtual tour of this whole property that you can view in your browser. I recommend doing it in your browser on your phone. It's not the greatest experience, but this whole geyser or this whole area was mapped. It has little information bubbles. You can go in Yaga. You can go to the labyrinth. There's all kinds of cool things. So make sure you check that out. That was an official project I did for Burning Man last year. Now, obviously, I want to thank the BRCvr crew, Athena, Doug, Justin, everybody that's involved in this for making this happen and allowing me to do this. I'd like to thank Fred and Steve Rubenfield. They're my contacts at Burning Man and people I work with. Will Roger, amazing guys, Zach, and just the Fly Ranch crew and everybody that has allowed me to have access to this beautiful land and capture it and almost as a time capsule. My plan and my job kind of with them is to constantly come back every year and capture what's changed. And right now there's a big initiative to put sustainability projects in place. And now we have at least 2 or 3 of them happening on Fly Ranch. And I'm going to be capturing them and updating them into the virtual tour, probably be scanning them. And ideally, I will have a lot of the big pieces in a VR world where we can all hang out, kind of talk. So if you want to actually see this world outside of the event, there's a Altspace world code. You can check that out. And then I guess if there's any questions, I know I went through this fast. There may have been a lot of information. You might be scratching your head a little bit, but this is just kind of maybe hopefully spark some interest in the photogrammetry. So thank you, everyone.
Steve. That was fantastic. Thank you. We are going to take a couple questions. We do have a party that's supposed to be starting here 4 minutes ago, but I think it's important that we get some of our questions answered. And I want to say thank you to all of the Patreon members who are here today that are helping make all of this possible. So we could not do this without you, and that's why we do these fun events. So why don't we start with some questions? I think I saw a hand go up. Let me turn on the little allow hand. Oh, I won't it allow me to allow hand raises.
Oh, there's somebody has a hand up.
Ed, go ahead. Ask your question.
Right on. Thanks, Gateway. I had a question about the skybox, the background imagery. How did you shoot that? It looks really crispy.
So this is kind of what I do mainly for Burning Man. I shoot these 360 panoramas. I'll do them from the air and the ground. And I use my drone to shoot about 36 images, and then I stitch them together, and I have special software that does that. So, and when I bring them into Altspace, I change the texture resolution of the Android and PC and version, so you get a little bit better quality, so it doesn't look all blocky and stuff like that.
Cool. Yeah, really good job on the stitching.
Thanks. Anybody else?
Pretty remarkable.
I
actually wanted wanted to, halfway through your presentation, I wanted to take the screen and move it because you were talking about Fly Geyser and it was behind us. And I kept on going like, oh, wait. I just want the screen right here so I could see them next to each other.
Oh, yeah.
Do we have another question?
What I was going to say is if you guys go to the edges and look down, I mean, you can fall off, so make sure you have fly on. Just look around panorama, and if you're looking over that way, that's where the geyser is. And then over a little bit to the right or left, you'll see me in this little shaded tent area, kind of sitting there with my, because my drone's in the sky. There's also 3 geysers here. So Fly Geyser is the main geyser. Wizard is another geyser, and Little Pot, which is kind of a baby geyser that's been growing. So explore those if you'd like. And you have a question?
Yeah. Do you have any problems with the reflections of the water? I know that causes
Yeah, water reflections are always an issue. So
Can you get off the stage, please?
yeah.
Yeah, so if you can do photogrammetry outside, try to get a cloudy day, but
yeah.
it's not that easy. So so I spend a lot of time fixing water. So but thank you for the question. So I think that's about it then, right?
Echoes. You want to do one more?
Okay. Sure.
Echoes, you should have the megaphone now if you'd like to ask your question.
Oh, I already asked it.
Oh yeah, he's got it.
I'm sorry. Okay, let me take that off the list.
Okay, again, thank you guys. Explore, look over the edge, walk over to the other geysers, and I hope you enjoyed this talk. And I'll hang around a little bit if you want to do a quiet, conversation. But we've got DJ Celeste and everything going on, so it's time to party, right?
Yeah, let's get the party started. So we have, thank you, Gateway, so much. Thank you for creating this amazing world. And for those of you that weren't here at the beginning and don't know, this is an actual place that exists outside of Gerlach, Nevada. It is not too far away from where the Burning Man Festival happens. And right now, the population in the Black Rock Desert is growing as we are building the city that will greet 80,000 people in the next 43 days. Fly Geyser is just outside of Black Rock City on the Fly Ranch. And Steve has recreated it here. Normally it's a place no one gets to go to. Well, very few people get to go to. And now you get to enjoy it. So with that, I want to say thank you to everyone. If you want to know, as we set all the equipment up, I think the DJ gear is going to be set here soon. If you want to know more about what we're doing with BRCvr, go to brcvr.org and join our email list, join our Patreon. Please be a supporter and get invited to great events like this. If you're curious about what we're doing with the virtual burn this year, we're going and we're capturing as much footage and we're scanning as much art, photogrammetry, anybody, as we possibly can. And we're going to assemble it all into a virtual burn week that is actually going to happen in January. So we won't have the simultaneous burns going on, but we will offer you something that will be even grander come January of 2023. So with that, I present to you. Are we ready? Are we ready? Is this like
We're ready. Yeah.
we are? I present to you DJ Celeste. Celeste, are we ready?
Tomorrow morning, Athena and the newbie
Oh,
orientation.
that's right. Tomorrow morning, I am teaching a newbie orientation. Totally forgot about that. So tomorrow morning, I am teaching a newbie orientation for everyone who is interested about Burning Man, going to Burning Man, wants to learn about what you need to have the most successful Burning Man experience you possibly can. That's 10 a.m. Pacific time tomorrow, right here. Not right here in this world, but right here on the Altspace platform. So I will see you tomorrow.
You guys want to kill the web projector?